Sword Art Online is the kind of series that a lot of people have very passionate opinions about, most of them negative. But of all the many, many problems SAO has, I think its game design actually has some interesting explanations when you look at the types of MMOs that were likely referenced when it came to its creation. I won't lie, this is very much a response to Mother's Basement's now 9-year-old video about why SAO is a terrible game too. Jeff's points are generally good, and I agree with them from a design perspective, but upon a recent rewatch, I was ultimately left wondering why Reki Kawahara made such bizarre choices for his series in the first place. It was this quote that really stuck with me.
It's abundantly clear that Reki Kawahara doesn't play video games at all, despite having written 2 light novel series about them.
The more research I did, the more conclusions I came to about the backstory behind the writing of SAO, and the angrier this old video about it kinda made me. Despite my clickbait title, I am not here to rock the boat, nor am I going out of my way to defend author Reki Kawahara. I personally think his writing starts at bad and craters constantly into gross at various points throughout Sword Art Online's history. But I'm speaking up here because a lot of the choices that Kawahara made for the world of SAO actually make a lot of sense. I realize this sounds ridiculous, but bear with me for a second. The thing that becomes integral to understanding the design of SAO beyond a superficial level, as both a game and a series, is that it is very much a relic of its time. Similarly, Jeff's video is also a relic of its time, and he's gone on to feature great topics about deeper points than just Sword Art Online bad, as well as acknowledge the shortcomings of his earlier work. I legitimately enjoy a lot of his videos, even in cases, like this one, where I disagree with him. So while I'm criticizing his takes, bear in mind that I'm specifically criticizing this 2016 version of Jeff. Now, what did I mean when I said that SAO is a relic of its time? This might seem like an odd statement, as the anime started airing in 2012 and the light novels began publishing in 2009, but SAO is much older than you probably think. When you think of an MMO that might have inspired SAO, the go-to is probably World of Warcraft, right? It's iconic, it's been going strong since 2004, it's the most popular MMORPG of all time. Nope. SAO is older than that. How about MapleStory or Ragnarok Online, 2 of the premier free-to-play MMOs of the Asian market? No, Sword Art Online is even older. Dot Hack Sign might be the oldest MMORPG-related work that most people can name. For reference, the manga Dot Hack Legend of the Twilight, the very first piece of media in the series, released in December 2001. And Reki Kawahara started writing what would be known as the Aincrad arc of SAO in fall 2001. Is Sword Art Online, both the show and in-universe game, a total mess? Yes, absolutely. You Should Watch SAO is effectively a damnation upon one's entire lineage to anyone with more than a cursory knowledge of modern anime. Is it an accurate look into the MMOs of 20 or even 10 years into the future? Absolutely not. Imagine being trapped in a VR death game and still having to rely on a dial-up modem. But if we look at Sword Art Online in the context of its era, of a time where EverQuest was only just starting to outsell Ultima Online and the original Xbox was the hot new console on the market, it starts to make a little more sense. And while I'll explain what I can, there's also cultural context to consider, most of which goes beyond my understanding. Unfortunately, I was not a man in his mid-20s living in Japan in the year 2001. I cannot speak to what was popular or commonly known among the otaku of the time, and whether certain inspirations are attributable or not, especially when Reki Kawahara hasn't said much about it himself. But I'll try my best. Sword Art Online is a Japanese franchise about a VR MMO of the same name, where if you die in the game, you die in real life. And then a series of increasingly complicated conspiracies involving other VR MMOs, but we'll get there in a little bit. A lot of criticisms to be made of the titular game Sword Art Online have since been at least acknowledged, if not elaborated upon or actively retconned in the subseries Sword Art Online Progressive. But frankly, I have given SAO enough of my time, thank you, so I'm going to be largely ignoring that information for my sanity's sake. There were 10,000 players at the launch of SAO, of which 6,147 ultimately survived. For comparison, Ultima Online was considered successful upon reaching a count of 100,000 subscribers in 6 months. EverQuest, which sold better, managed twice that by a year after its launch. Who would have expected that a decade later in 2010, any MMO would be popular enough to hit 12 million monthly subscribers? Well, .hack predicted 4 million, but the point stands. The number of players trapped in SAO was 50,000 in the original web novel, which I think makes more sense logistically, but is also a nightmare to consider in reality. The difference between the light novel's 10,000 and the web novel's 50,000 takes it to another level in terms of scope. The light novel's death toll of 3,853 would already constitute a serious terror attack, and the web novel's toll of 11,139 is almost 3 times as bad. So, is only 10,000 players for the world's first full-dive VR MMO silly? Yes. But any higher number, and this would not just be the Sword Art Online incident, as much as it would be an unprecedentedly horrific tragedy for the entire country of Japan. Additionally, for all the sci-fi future tech in this series, having 10,000 players on a single server, a server running with no apparent maintenance or downtime, mind you, is a lot more feasible than 50,000. Even modern MMO servers don't run at that capacity. Part of that is out of consideration for players with lower spec hardware and poor internet connection. And because the game's VR headwear, the Nerve Gear, was apparently a console unto itself, I wouldn't be surprised if a couple people ended up with their brains fried because too many entities had to be rendered simultaneously. For that matter, all of the SAO players had to be moved to hospitals and monitored with the same level of care afforded to any patient in a coma ward. This would require not only staff, but a litany of hospital equipment, patient beds, even ambulances. At least, 9,000 people's worth? The series even makes a point that once the game is cleared, an entire 3-story school in Tokyo ends up dedicated to the education and mental health care of just SAO's teenage players. Moving into the game proper, let's talk about the in-game world itself. The MMO Sword Art Online features a tower of 100 floors, which is called Aincrad. The players are only freed from the death game when SAO is cleared, which is achieved by defeating the bosses of every floor up to 100. This is perhaps the most unusual aspect of SAO. No other MMO before or since has been structured in this manner. I can see why Kawahara used this idea. Many MMOs are only considered to really begin when one has gotten to max level, a process that can take days or weeks to reach. This is where the massive, iconic bosses are fought, and top-tier loot is won. People love watching world-first mythic raid clears more than they do the 20-plus hours it takes to grind to max level, or 70-plus hours way back when. When it comes to a story perspective, however, 50 hours of grinding with comparatively minimal risk and then a never-ending boss rush isn't exactly great pacing. So, as silly as it is, the tower system does establish stakes and a clear goal for the players to work towards and the readers to understand. It's also an easy concept to understand for the audience who might go into SAO with little to no experience with or understanding of an MMO. Back in 2001, that was a lot of people. On top of this, I imagine there's a lot of rule of cool being evoked, both for the sake of the story and from Kawahara's own wish fulfillment. Wouldn't it be exciting if anyone could get a skill that was totally unique to them? What if there were 100 world areas, each with different environments, enemies, and bosses? What would MMO combat be like if it wasn't click and wait for something to happen because it's the era of dial-up internet? And as boringly generic as a fantasy MMO where you can only use melee weapons is, it creates a lot of cool moments. Because in a literal death game, why would you ever get into close range when you have magic or archery? Knowing the ways that gamers play, and especially how they abuse game mechanics, what is there to keep someone from hiding in a hidden nook and pinging a boss to death over the course of several hours? What makes the VR part of VR MMO noteworthy at all if you're basically just playing an FPS? For that matter, the absence of a healer spec in the game at all seems sort of sensible. Either they bring you back from the brink of death, or they're hilariously underpowered because of how useless a revival skill would be in an actual death game. Now let's move on to what seems to be SAO's biggest influence, Ultima Online. There's a reason I'm bringing up Ultima specifically. According to an interview done on the Japanese video game website 4Gamer, Kawahara began writing SAO when he was actively playing Ultima Online, and was even inspired to do so by some of the stories told about the game and its players. Some of SAO's weirdest eccentricities seem to be taken exactly from Ultima Online. Is it weird that, as an MMO, there are no classes in SAO? Well, Ultima Online didn't have any either. The backbone of Ultima was its skill system, and you can see this in Liz and Silica's somewhat unusual roles of blacksmith and beast tamer, respectively. Kawahara made as much clear in an interview he did for Liz and Silica's Japanese exclusive character book.
How did nobody on the dev team figure out that the game is supposed to kill people? I mean, you can poison food. There's no function for that mechanic if the game is operating normally.
Not only is the ability to poison food a thing in Ultima as an extension of the poison skill, there is even a taste identification skill that allows you to detect if something has been poisoned before you consume it. This was when a lot of games were making things up as they went, because they were in the midst of establishing the genre. I really cannot stress the comparison enough. This might be what SAO looks like in the anime, but this is what MMOs were actually like at the time it was written. It's also interesting to me that many of the details that seem to make SAO a bad game are exactly the kind of traits the World of Warcraft Classic invokes nostalgia for. Like how, when the viewer is first introduced to Kirito and Klein as they're playing SAO, they're grinding mobs. They're not doing quests or dungeons at low level. They're killing boars one at a time. Even though the game possesses the Cardinal system, a highly advanced artificial intelligence that, among other things, can generate new quests, balance the game, fix bugs, and modify the world as a result of player choices and actions, they are still stuck hunting boars. Because even though games like EverQuest and the original Phantasy Star Online might have had more structure than their predecessor in Ultima, grinding mobs out in the field was still a substantial part of the game experience in that era. Why does Kirito tout being part of a party as the better choice, only to go and solo through most of the game? Mobs in older MMOs wouldn't spawn en masse or at the speed they do today, so it was once easy for a single party to obliterate all the enemies in an area or end up waiting in a line to tackle a quest boss. Factoring in how experience was often split between party members in this era, a solo grind might, if you're knowledgeable, be faster, but while a party grind would be slower, it would also be much safer when your literal life is on the line. If you're interested in more of a look into the logistics of this era, I highly recommend Dan Olsen's World of Warcraft Classic and What We Left Behind, which is a great retrospective on these older MMOs, their nostalgic value, and how they compare to those of the present day. Link is, as they say, in the doobly-doo. A lot of iconic MMOs started releasing in 2002 and onward, some of which Reki Kawahara even played. After the aforementioned Ultima Online, there was the original Phantasy Star Online and World of Warcraft, as well as Ragnarok Online, Final Fantasy XI, and even Perfect World. And while Ultima and the lesser-known Wizardry series were credited with directly inspiring SAO, you can also see how this wave of second-generation MMOs influenced Kawahara's own game worlds moving forward. Elfheim Online often receives criticism for its poor balance. It has 9 races, each with its own faction in a PvP-based game alongside possessing different proficiencies and skills. For comparison, Dark Age of Camelot released in 2001 with 12 playable races spread across 3 factions, a heavy player versus player, or realm versus realm, focus, and a whopping total of 32 classes. And this was the early 2000s, where different races in MMOs would have different bonuses to attributes. Every class had an optimal race option, and then every other option besides. On top of that, most fantasy MMOs also restricted certain classes to certain races, usually for lore reasons. Balance was a goal, but definitely not a feature. Like, players arguing about how Horde or Alliance is overpowered because of their different racial abilities, or because one has shamans and the other has paladins was a thing for years, and that's just dealing with 2 factions. While we're on the subject of WoW,
So hypothetically, a level 1000 player could run around the starting area, ganking noobs with no repercussions.
my dude has clearly never been spawn camped in Azure Watch by a bored, maxed out Horde player when you're leveling a new Draenei, huh? That's okay. We can't all be expected to play the most popular MMO of all time when we're criticizing an anime about the genre.
The way that skills are leveled up is pretty awful in itself. They gain levels as they're used, meaning that if you use one attack a lot, which would get really fucking boring, again, it'll get more powerful. And if you take a lot of damage, you'll heal faster.
See, this is what I mean. Did Jeff not play World of Warcraft, ever? This is how all weapon skills in the game worked up through Cataclysm in 2010, as well as in other contemporary staples like Ultima and EverQuest. He draws comparisons to Final Fantasy II, but this isn't an unprecedented concept for an MMO at all. So those games would have made better comparisons than an unrelated game from an unrelated platform.
Doesn't play video games at all.
These clearly outdated oddities are what made me find Alfheim to be the most believable of SAO's games. It feels like an early 2000s MMO, down to relying on role-playing for a majority of the content, and being laden with unverified, impractical rumors that add a sense of mystery and intrigue. This was before games launched with fully data-mined wikis that the player base could browse through, highly publicized developer live streams, or even well-explained in-game tutorials. As silly as it might be to say, ALO might honestly be the arc that is most dragged down by story and pacing rather than game design. It's the only one of these MMOs that I would not only play, but probably actually enjoy. Finally on our list of trainwreck games is the notorious Gale Online, wherein Reki Kawahara set out to write about the MMO of the future and accidentally predicted the play-to-earn economy. Although that's probably giving him a little too much credit, seeing as Entropia Universe, the first real money MMO, had been released the year prior. A lot of criticism has been given to Gale Online over the years, from its nonsensical, randomized character appearance system, to the fact that Kirito somehow parries bullets with a laser sword. But I argue that GGO is actually the most realistic MMORPG featured in Sword Art Online at all, if you look at it in one specific light. Why does it take 8 months to build a character that you can never respec? Why is the gameplay so hardcore and yet seemingly also pay to win? Because it's a blockchain game. Obviously, I'm being hyperbolic, but GGO is oddly prescient when it comes to the influence of the play-to-earn model seen in some modern games. Besides its use of guns in sci-fi setting, GGO's main differentiator as a game from the other MMOs of the series is its status as the only VR MMO game with a real money-to-game currency conversion system. Some people are specifically said to make a living from playing it, and, like blockchain games in real life, it exists in a gray zone from a law perspective. Even the game's player avatars are randomly generated and can be bought and sold for real money. In a sense, it's the most futuristic of the MMOs in these mechanics as much as it is setting. When Kawahara started releasing the Death Gun chapters of SAO in 2004, the only FPS MMOs on the market were lesser-known titles like World War II Online, Neocron, and the original PlanetSide. I also have to mention that even if the lack of explanation for the stats and how they work in GGO is quite silly, I wouldn't be surprised if certain weapons, accessories, or skills had their own stat requirements that encourage specific builds and breakpoints. And that's ignoring how esoteric but oddly requisite a lot of game mechanics, including stats, were in MMORPGs back in the day.
Either one stat is so obviously overpowered that nothing else even matters and everyone has the same build, or all of the stats are roughly equal and balanced, and it becomes impossible to tell at a glance what an enemy will be capable of.
Nobody tell him about transmog. Everybody hates Kayaba Akihiko, which is fair. He locked 10,000 people in a death game and ended up killing nearly 40% of them. On top of that, any attempt to understand his admittedly middling, motivation was ultimately throttled by Kawahara's own mediocre writing. So here's an amateur attempt at looking into who Kayaba was seemingly supposed to be. There are, in a sense, two real-life people who are likely to have inspired the character. First up is Richard Garriott, creator of the Ultima series. I cannot say with certainty that Richard Garriott was any part of the basis for Kayaba Akihiko. As far as I am aware, Kawahara himself has never made that claim. I do think it seems incredibly likely, though. I previously discussed the obvious influence from Ultima Online on SAO, and Richard Garriott was the creator of the Ultima series as a whole. Though he worked with the team, he is generally seen as the head and driving force of Ultima Online. He is also one of the inspirations for James Halliday from Ready Player One, a series often compared to SAO in both its setting and theming. Garriott even had a player avatar in Ultima Online, much like Kayaba does with Heathcliff. And, similarly to Heathcliff, Richard Garriott's Lord British was also invincible, up until someone was able to kill him due to a bug, much to the shock of the other players. So yeah, there's definitely some interesting parallels there. The other apparent inspiration is the man himself, Reki Kawahara. Like Kawahara, Kayaba took inspiration from the game series Wizardry when designing Sword Art Online. Kawahara was also 27 when he began writing SAO, and Kayaba was 28 at the end of the Sword Art Online incident. There were also multiple times that I accidentally called Kawahara Kayaba while working on this video. Reading so much about Reki Kawahara and some of the interviews he's done, while I still kind of want to fistfight him in a parking lot for a variety of reasons, I did end up feeling an unexpected amount of sympathy for him. He comes across as a real nerd who kind of fell face first into his success and has spent most of his career trying to retcon and rework his standout series into something less bad. And while a better video essayist could maybe try and draw a comparison between Kawahara and Jeff in a similar sort of regard, I think that would do him a disservice. Most times I've ever wanted to fistfight Jeff Thu was the result of a middling anime take,
Mushoku Tensei is art,
rather than because of problematic tropes haphazardly piled atop bad writing. Jeff said these things in 2016, and who among us did not have a terrible take in 2016? His videos covering bad anime like SAO are what led me to subscribe to him in the first place, after all. Thank you for watching.